Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Super excited for this video as we're going to break down the San Antonio Spurs with another offseason preview. Remember, continuing our series of offseason previews that will be debuting on the channel over the next couple of weeks and probably months as teams either get eliminated from the playoffs or turn their eyes to the 2024 offseason. If you guys do enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. And let's jump into that video preview here now, where we're going to talk about the Spurs and their 2023-2024 season recap. We're then going to also turn our eyes to the NBA draft. What are the lottery odds for the Spurs, who have not one, but two potential top 10 picks in this year's draft? We're going to look at the NBA draft prospects that they could consider with those picks as well. There's a pretty long list of players that I think do make some good deal of sense for San Antonio. The NBA free agency situation, obviously the Spurs are not the biggest spenders typically in free agency. I think the biggest signing in franchise history was LaMarcus Aldridge, which panned out pretty decently, but they're not typically the team that goes out and hands out max contracts in free agency. So I've got some good, unique, niche players that I think they could target in the offseason. We're also going to look at trade possibilities for them as well. That's been a big topic of discussion on Spurs social media lately, and I think that's something worth addressing in this video. And then we'll give my early outlook for next season. Remember, a lot can change between now and the actual start of the regular season, so don't hold me to everything I say in that portion of the video. Obviously, things can change, and I'll have a better feel for what this team's really looking like by the start of July. So there's a lot of time between now and then for some of these moving pieces, but I'm excited to detail the Spurs and their potential offseason. But let's start with this past season. What did we see? What did we learn about this team? Well, 2023-2024, this team was clearly not intent on trying to win a ton of games. I think that was the first thing that really stood out to me, trying Jeremy Sochan at point guard, never really committing to Tre Jones being the full-time starting point guard. Like, those steps were an act from management and from Greg Popovich to intentionally lose games. Now, I met Greg Popovich this year. He treated me with a ton of respect. He seems like an awesome person. Obviously, you know, he's got some of those famous media interventions where he only just gets up and leaves, or he has something funny to say back. He seems like an actually awesome guy who just really loves basketball, and he's been so successful because of that as well. So I'm not trying to discredit Pop in any way here. His resume speaks for himself as right at the top of the list for the best coaches in NBA history, because he has just been tremendous during his coaching tenure there in San Antonio. But it was clear that this year their intention was to not try and push for the play-in, to not try and push for the playoffs, and not that they really had the roster to do that anyway, but I think they were very intent on trying to lose games to manage their future flexibility by adding in more young talent onto this roster, which I think is a pretty genius idea, because at the top of the roster, you do have Victor Wembanyama, who I believe lived up to all of the hype I gave him and more. Remember, last year I was saying he was going to average over 20 points a game. I was very comfortable in that. And most of the comments and responses to me saying that all last draft cycle was, there's no way he's averaging that. Are you kidding me? And well, he averaged over 21 points a game as a rookie, and that was playing like 28, 29 minutes a night. He was capable of averaging 25 to 30 coming into the league if they were playing him heavier minutes. Again, that's part of the idea behind losing. They rested him, I think, more than he really needed, but I think they managed his minutes well as well, trying to focus for long-term health and stability and durability, adjusting to an 82-game season. I think that they handled that just fine. Don't have any complaints there, and he still put up crazy numbers. He averaged a double-double, averaged 3.5 blocks per game. He's in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. He will make all defense as a rookie, which is just absurd. It speaks volumes to who this guy was as a prospect. Remember, I was extremely high on him. I had him in my GOAT debate when it comes to prospects ever. I multiple times said that he's going to be the best prospect I ever evaluate, and I feel like you guys got to see it all season long, which I'm super jealous of. I watched about 40 to 50 Spurs games this year. Obviously, I cover all 30 NBA teams. I'm an actual reporter in Minnesota as well, covering the Timberwolves, so I couldn't watch all 82 of San Antonio, which bums me out because he's such a joy to watch. Feels like every time you watch Wembanyama, you're just seeing something you've never seen before. And the thing is, that's really scary, and this is scary for the rest of the league. So if you're a fan of one of the other 29 teams right now, you might want to plug your ears here. He's only scratching the surface. He's going to turn into the best player in the league, and I don't even think it'll be close once he reaches his apex, because he has the traits to be the best defender of all time. and he has some of the offensive skills that if they find ways to put the right pieces around him and also get him to play within the right system and style where he's getting to the rim a lot, but also taking wide open shots as much as possible. And that, again, comes down to the surrounding talent around him, kind of putting more pressure as scores and gravity on the floor. I think Wembanyama is going to be one of the best players when it's all said and done ever to touch a basketball. And I think there's a good case to be made that maybe he kind of settles the GOAT debate with what he could possibly turn into. Now, it's way too premature to have that conversation. I'm not trying to suggest that currently, but I'm saying I think there's a chance just with the type of player that he is, the work ethic that he has, and how seriously he takes winning. He's got all of the traits that you're really looking for from a franchise player. Devin Vassell, nearly 20 points per game this year. I think he's on a good contract. I know people were like, whoa, when that number came in. I don't think it surprised a ton of Spurs fans. Vassell's a baller. And I think he's the type of player who can grow into a third guy, someone who on a championship caliber team is kind of like your Chris Middleton, where he's going to come in and give you a bunch of buckets. He's able to score timely baskets. I think for him, scoring in the half court comes rather easily. And I think obviously his shooting is extremely important around Victor, and he's really one of the few players that I trust significantly around Wembanyama to be an offensive engine and an offensive scorer around him. I still think the Spurs are missing one or two key pieces there in that equation on the offensive end of the floor, and I think defensively there's a few ways that this team could really enhance as well going forward, and that's playing less young guys. Obviously they'll mature and grow and develop defensively as the roster just kind of ages naturally. But then some other bright spots. Jeremy Sochan, I know the narrative at the start of the year was, oh my gosh, he's not passing Wemby the ball. As the season progressed, you could tell that the players and the surrounding pieces around Wembanyama got more comfortable playing alongside of him and more accustomed to utilizing him as a scorer, as an off-ball player, as a lob threat, so on and so forth. And I think that's still going to be a growing process. I still see it all the time in Minnesota with Rudy Gobert. It's hard to fully utilize a rim presence like a Rudy Gobert for some of these other players who are so accustomed to creating their own shot or playing a certain kind of way. Remember, Jeremy Sochan in his time at Baylor never had a player like Victor Wembanyama last year with the Spurs. As a rookie, he did not have a player like Victor Wembanyama. So there's a little bit of a learning curve that these players have had to go through. I think Sochan obviously had a ton on his plate at the beginning of the year. Toward the end of the season, you could tell he was starting to feel more comfortable. They kind of reverted him back to his normal play style a bit. And as he eased into the season, he got more and more comfortable playing with Wembanyama. I still think Sochan's a key part of the future here for the Spurs moving forward. Then Tre Jones, really great season from him. He was an actual really productive winning player for them this year, and a player that I think projects to be a really good high-end backup point guard for the majority of his career, kind of like his brother Tyus Jones. When you have to start this type of player, you're not going to win as many games as evidenced by Washington this year with Tyus. Tre Jones having a pretty significant role this year in San Antonio. It's not going to lead to a ton of winning because there's just not enough scoring gravity there. But if this is, maybe your 7th or 8th guy off the bench and he's your lead backup point guard, you're going to be able to take care of the basketball. You're going to get good looks when they're on the floor. And you're going to be able to have a competent second unit, especially when you surround the second unit with maybe one big-time scorer, someone who can really provide that scoring gravity. I think the big question going forward, though, and this has been what I've been wondering since even before they drafted Victor Wembanyama, I had videos on this last offseason when they got the number 1 pick. How do they want to build their roster around Wemby? To start the year, they tried playing Zach Collins at center next to Wembanyama, which I was never a huge fan of. I understood the idea behind it, kind of lessening his load defensively, making the game and adjustment period a little bit easier for him. But at the end of the day, I think you have your best lineup on the floor with Wembanyama playing center because of his ability to handle out in space, shoot jump shots off the dribble. I just think you put more pressure on other teams by having to have a center guard a perimeter player. And with Wembanyama's ability to handle the ball, play out on the perimeter, it does just, I think, test other teams' depth and other teams' center play in a way that, for me, if I'm San Antonio here, yes, it's important to have a backup center, but I'm not building my team around a center. Or I'm not planning on drafting another center around Wembanyama. So a player like Donovan Clingan in this draft, even though I think Clingan is an awesome prospect, I think there's a ton of things that he's going to bring to a table to an NBA team. If I'm San Antonio, I'm not limiting my team's upside by drafting someone like Klingon because of the positional controversy there. For me, I would rather prioritize perimeter play, shooting, playmaking, getting more actual perimeter offensive talent and maybe some perimeter defensive talent as well, rather than a center next to Wembanyama for a few key reasons. And mostly of the idea there is just how high is the ceiling for this team offensively with Wembanyama on the floor. They could be a dominant offensive team for as long as he is playing. And I think if you ever view him as playing power forward again, I think you're just limiting that long-term potential a bit. It's great to have size, especially skilled size, but I'm just not sure in this draft if that is going to play itself out. But we will talk about if they get the number 1 pick or not. When it comes to the 2024 NBA Draft Lottery odds, as I toss to that, the Spurs' own pick is projected currently to be 5th overall, but there is a 42.1% chance of moving into the top 4 and a 10.5% chance at moving all the way up to pick number 1, which opens up the window to maybe drafting another big player. And we'll talk about what his fit would look like next to Victor Wembanyama here in a minute. The Raptors' pick, which remember was traded to San Antonio from the Jakob Poeltl trade, is top 6 protected. And guess what? That pick, with the Raptors' epic tank job to end the season, is now projected 6th overall. Now remember, we still have the lottery. So here's the thing. The Raptors have about a 37% chance to move up into the top 4. Anything in the top 6 right now for San Antonio means that pick is staying with Toronto. So what you really need to be hoping for, Spurs fans, is this 54.1% chance that the pick actually falls down to pick number 7 or lower. So pick number 7, 8, 9. I believe there's a small chance it could get to 10, but that's not very likely. And what that would take, so when you're watching the draft lottery, Spurs fans, what you have to hope for is a team between picks 14 and 7. One of those teams moves up in the lottery, that you see that team get skipped. For example, the Memphis Grizzlies are projected to have the 7th pick. If we get to pick number 7 and the Raptors pick pops up, that means the Grizzlies jumped up into the top 4. So that's what you really need to be rooting for if you want this pick to convey this season, which I think you should, given the, I think, overall depth of the draft. You can get 2 really good prospects in the top 10. This is the year for San Antonio where if they get their own pick in the top 5 and they get the Raptors pick at either pick 7 or pick 8, you're looking at a really great situation to add some good young talent around Victor Wembanyama, 2 lottery picks that could really help this team moving forward. And it's a good opportunity to add some real talent onto your roster. So again, that's what Spurs fans should be rooting for. So who are some of those prospects that I could see the San Antonio Spurs considering? And there's quite a few of them. Again, I said this is going to be a long list. There's a few that I really like. I want to start with Zachary Rissachere, another Frenchman. I know Spurs fans are probably hoping, hey, let's get as many Spurs players from France as possible and kind of build up that team identity through the nationality, right? Listen, I don't think that should be at all the way that the Spurs draft. They should draft based off of actual talent and skill set and the way that they want to build out their team. And notice I don't have Donovan Klingon on this list, but I do have another center in Alex Sarr from France. He's been playing with the Perth Wildcats in the NBL, spent some time in Overtime Elite as well. He projects to be kind of a tweener big man, a little bit of a power forward and a little bit of a center. If they get the number 1 pick, somehow, some way, that 10.5% chance hits, and the Spurs are picking number 1 again in the 2024 NBA draft, Alex Sarr should firmly be in consideration for San Antonio, because I think next to Wembanyama, these 2 guys could actually fit together. Sarr has a unique ability to handle the basketball a bit for his size at about 7'1". He's also capable of hitting mid-range jump shots, pull-ups, and the hope is that some of that will translate into him becoming a good 3-point shooter at some point in his career. But the real strength of drafting Sarr would be the San Antonio Spurs defense. Sarr is one of these hyper-switchable big men who probably can survive out in space, but has the length to be a weak side shot blocker and potentially a defensive anchor. Now, I'm not exactly sure on that for most teams because he doesn't rebound the ball at a great clip. Kind of similar to Jaren Jackson Jr. and some of the reasons that we haven't seen Memphis really play Jackson at the center spot very much. What I will say, though, is when you have Victor Wembanyama, it doesn't matter if Sarr is an elite defensive rebounder. The 2 of them together with the length, size, rim deterrence, and the versatility in their scheme. I think with Wemby or Sarr, you're going to be able to switch out in space. I think you're going to be able to do a bunch of different things with either of these big men. And when you have them both on the floor together, you can really get aggressive because the other one will likely be in a spot to help weak side and protect the rim. The Spurs would probably blossom into one of the best rim deterrence teams in the league, while also not mortgaging a ton of their offensive success because Sarr, like Wemby, has a little bit of an outside-inside game. The two of them, I think, can coexist offensively. Alex Sarr should be the desired prospect for San Antonio. But there are other prospects in this draft that I think make a good deal of sense. When we look at some of the guards, Rob Dillingham, Reed Sheppard, and Nikola Topic stand out to me as some of the best options for a few different reasons. Dillingham, I love his kind of electricity he provides as a scorer. He's quick twitch, gets to spots, has a fantastic touch, shoots really difficult shots, and was very, very efficient on them at Kentucky. I think if there's a player on this list who has like superstar offensive generation potential, Rob Dillingham might be at the top of the list for me, even though Sarr defensively I think is a very good, strong defensive prospect with some offensive upside. Dillingham for me is the other way. A player who I think could blossom into a go-to offensive player, not necessarily a number one on a championship team, but a really great complementary player. I think the player you're going to see most comparisons to for Dillingham is probably Tyrese Maxey. I don't think they're the same style of player, but I think Dillingham from a size profile and a speed profile is probably about as close as it's going to get from a comparison standpoint, although I think it is kind of a lazy comp. I'm still working through some of my comparisons and some of my draft prospect evals. So Dillingham for me is a player who I'm not willing to give my own comp yet for. Reed Sheppard though, what I see him as is a smaller but way better Austin Reeves. Think about Austin Reeves and his ability to handle the basketball in the pick and roll, but also to be a cutter off the ball. I think Reed Sheppard does a lot of those similar things where you can toggle in between on-ball and off-ball defensive responsibilities, but Sheppard also has extremely quick hands, very high steal rate in college. He was a defensive playmaker. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a stopper at the NBA level. He definitely won't be, but I could see him being a player that Greg Popovich grows to love because of his ability to pass the basketball, play within a system, and find success in the gaps because he's an elite shooter. Shot really, really, really well at Kentucky this past year. I think he would stand out to me as a player who, you draft him into San Antonio, he's going to at least at the very worst provide good spacing and some of that spacing gravity, which continues to be a theme of this video because I think around Wembanyama, the more scoring gravity you can have, the easier the game will be for him as a passer, as a scorer, as a decision maker. The more spacing, the more shooting, the more threats you have on the floor, the better for San Antonio. I think Reed Sheppard categorizes that in a lot of ways. And then Nikola Topic, maybe not the most lethal dominant scorer, but this is the type of player who does fit into the way Popovich coaches the game. Someone who prioritizes ball movement and the ball being able to swing side to side. And as they kind of figure out ways to work Wembanyama into being a pick and roll screener and doing a lot of different things with him as like a lob finisher and working out of the middle of the floor against zones. I think Topic and his passing ability, probably the best passer in this draft, stand out to me. He's got good positional size, and there isn't really a pass he can't throw. He's got eyes in the back of his head. He's a creative wizard with the ball. And I think with that, San Antonio could find some success with any of these three guards I've listed. Matas Buzelis makes some sense as well from a positional standpoint. He could be a long-term hybrid forward next to Sochan and next to Wembanyama. And then Cody Williams for me is the big upside grab here. Low volume three-point shooter at Colorado, but he shot it extremely, extremely well. Shot 41 threes, so less than 2 per game. It's not the most impressive volume by any stretch of the imagination, but he was in the 90th plus percentile as a catch and shoot shooter on unguarded opportunities. So under the notion that, hey, Wembanyama is going to create open looks for others, Cody Williams, I think, has the shooting skill set to probably thrive off of that, but he's also got the downhill dynamism, the offensive slashing capability to be a good half-court scorer around Wembanyama and Vassell. So these are the prospects that really stood out to me. Again, I think the biggest absence on the list is Donovan Clingan, because if I was running San Antonio right now, I would not draft a traditional rim center. Alex Sarr, I think, kind of stands alone as the outside-inside big in this draft that I think would fit next to Wembanyama long-term. So when we look at their NBA free agency situation as well, the Spurs are projected to have a lot of money in free agency, $34.4 million to be exact in cap space. They do have an unrestricted free agent in Cedi Osman. I'm sure some Spurs fans would like to see him back. While I think that definitely could be a possibility, I'm not sure that's going to be at the top of the priority list here for San Antonio, as there are some free agent options out there that I think would be meaningful upgrades over Cedi Osman. Even though he is a lower quality player in the league, I think he has a spot on a roster for sure. I'm just not sure that's going to be the top priority here for San Antonio. Some players who I do think will be back, though, are restricted free agents Dominic Barlow and Sandro Mamukelashvili. Both of these guys, I think, fit into San Antonio's play style and desired way of playing. Barlow's extremely athletic. I referenced earlier how Alex Sarr spent time in Overtime Elite. Barlow was actually the first ever player in the NBA from the Overtime Elite program, so credit to him for that, kind of paving the way into the league. Sandro Mamukelashvili obviously came over from the Milwaukee Bucks, I believe, last season, and with his skill set as a playmaker, passer, obviously doesn't see a ton of minutes, but I'm sure will likely be back in San Antonio next year. Devontae Graham's contract, it's important to note that he's slated to make over $12 million, but less than $3 million of that is guaranteed, so the Spurs could move off of him for pretty much nothing. And he could also be a trade candidate because of that as well, which we'll talk about here in a minute. From movable contracts, Zach Collins, they extended him during the season. He has 2 more years now on his contract at $34.8 million. He's slated to make $16 million next year. I think that's a movable contract. It's not like teams are going to be lining up to say, hey, we want Zach Collins on that price point. But if you need to attach money into a deal, Zach Collins' contract is not going to be an immediate turnoff for other teams, say like the Chandler Parsons contract from about a decade ago with Memphis. It's not that type of contract. It's not a great one, in my opinion, on Zach Collins, but it's not the worst thing either. And San Antonio, they might just hold on to him because I don't think that they hate him being their backup big man behind Wembanyama. They also have some young guys with contracts who are movable. Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, CD Sissoko. So if there's any type of need to open up some more money or to find ways to maybe make a trade, these guys with contracts in the $2 million to $4 million range could be utilized in that way. I'm not suggesting that they're going to get rid of all of these guys or any of them even. I'm just pointing out that they are options from a contractual standpoint that could be aggregated into a trade, which, again, what I said earlier too, playing less of Branham, Wesley, Sissoko probably would improve the Spurs defense a bit more as well going into next season anyway. So who are some free agent targets that make sense with that $34.4 million in cap space? Malik Monk stands out to me as someone who could be an option, although I don't think he'll actually be the one there in San Antonio. But this year he had a fantastic season on driving kicks. He got to the paint a ton, and on an overwhelming percentage of his actual paint touches, he was kicking out to shooters. So if you're looking at kind of weaponizing some of the other players on your roster, Malik Monk's actually a pretty good offensive engine. He's really found a lot of success in Sacramento playing for Mike Brown. I think it's best for Monk's career to stay with the Kings, but the Spurs, with their money, they could look at Malik Monk as a $17, $18 million a year player, go above and beyond some of those mid-level exception offers that he might get. And I could see Sacramento offering something very similar, $17 to $20 million a year for him. I don't think it is outrageous, but I do think the Spurs would be benefited by getting him. Gary Trent Jr., a name I threw on here that I think I wouldn't be shocked if the Spurs signed him, but I'm just not sure if that's exactly the type of player that they're going to go with. The next 2 players, though, are players I definitely could see being in San Antonio next year. Kyle Anderson for the Minnesota Timberwolves, of course, spent some time in San Antonio at the beginning of his career, and this year he's referenced Greg Popovich multiple times and the impact that he's had on his career, the way that he's learned to play the game at the NBA level, and he has some really good experience working with a French big man who can catch lobs and throw them down like none other. With Rudy Gobert, Kyle Anderson and Gobert have a very good chemistry on the floor, working together in pick and roll and utilizing some of Anderson's playmaking capabilities. Remember, he was a point guard in college at UCLA, and at times has played point guard this year for the Wolves. I think his fit in San Antonio would be very obvious. He's a good defensive player and a really intriguing offensive player, even though he doesn't shoot the ball a ton, pretty low volume shooter. he has had some success in recent years shooting the basketball, especially 2 years ago. And I think now if you look at him as a veteran to come back into San Antonio, it makes all the sense in the world. Kris Dunn is one of the best screen navigators in the NBA, one of the best permanent defensive guards in the league. So if you're looking at maximizing Wembanyama defensively, giving him a guard like Kris Dunn who can be a workhorse on that end of the floor would be beneficial as well. He's probably not going to cost a ton. And then I have some other cheap options on here as well. Delon Wright, someone who I think impacts the game in multiple ways. He gets downhill, slashes into the paint well, can create shots for others. After getting his feet in the paint, he's a good paint touch kick-out generator, just like we talked about with Monk, but not nearly the scoring threat that Malik Monk is, which is why Delon Wright will likely be playing on the minimum or close to the minimum, whereas Monk's going to be making quite a bit more. And then another interesting one, Bol kind of finding a little bit of a role this season with the Phoenix Suns coming off the bench for them now. There's still like a lot of problems with Bol's game. Defensively, his awareness is relatively low, but from a fun standpoint, could you imagine lineups with both Wembanyama and Bol on the floor? It would be enjoyable to watch, for sure. So obviously all the analysts, I use that quote loosely here, out there saying that, oh, Wembanyama, before Wemby got in the league, people were saying, oh, Wembanyama's just another Bol. Okay. I hope people realize the difference between those things now, and the difference between these two players. They're not anywhere close. But I do think Bol in San Antonio would be kind of fun to see. And I do think that if there's a guy who could give Bol a real opportunity to figure it out full time in the NBA, it would be Greg Popovich there in San Antonio. Then we move on to some of those trade targets. Everything is bigger in Texas, and these are some big names I can see the Spurs internally considering. Now, I'm not saying they're going to make one of those big trades. Let's start with some Atlanta Hawks guards, Tre Young and DeJounte Murray. Some Spurs fans probably just got excited hearing DeJounte Murray. Some of them probably said, hey, we don't want him back. I understand it both ways. The Spurs are sitting with a influx of draft picks right now. They have picks from multiple deals. They have the 2030 Dallas Mavericks pick swap. They've got picks from the Atlanta Hawks in the initial DeJounte Murray trade. The idea here of reacquiring DeJounte Murray would be giving back part, not all, of what you got from DeJounte Murray and his trade to Atlanta in the first place, and then kind of reassigning him to your starting point guard role, almost like you loaned him out, like in European soccer when a player loans out, or when a player is loaned out by a team to another team and then returns, say, 18 months later. That's almost exactly what the kind of timeline and story case would be here for San Antonio. You tanked just long enough to get Victor Wembanyama. You trade back for DeJounte Murray, get him back in the building, and all of a sudden you've got your point guard and center combination for the next 5 to 10 years. Tre Young, though, I think is the player that makes even more sense. DeJounte Murray, great mid-range pull-up game. I think has really grown as a three-point shooter over the past couple of seasons. And defensively is a better player than Tre Young for sure. But Tre Young has a different scoring gravity about him. And again, that's the big word of this video. Scoring gravity, I think, will just make Wembanyama's life easier. And then not only does Tre draw a crowd 25, 30 feet away from the hoop, but he's one of the best passers in the league, someone who can hit short rolls extremely well. We've seen that with Jalen Johnson this year. He feeds big men who are primarily lob catchers and long rollers like Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu. Tre Young is one of the best table setters in the NBA, always toward the top of the league in assists per game, but I think just the quality of his passing, when you look at the arm angle, the difficulty, it just seems like he is so adept at fitting every single type of pass to where it needs to go. I think with the Spurs long-term, this isn't the best route to becoming a great defensive team long-term, acquiring Tre Young, but what I would bet on is that Wembanyama is good enough to cover up the sins of Tre Young defensively, and then the offensive pairing of the two would be so overwhelming for other teams, and it would be a really easy duo to build around. You need 3-and-D players. Vassell's already your third scorer then in this system, with Tre Young and Wembanyama being the 1 and 2. Of course, Wemby will be the 1. Tre Young's been very complimentary of Victor in the media already, so I don't think Tre Young would be opposed to being the backseat guy behind Wembanyama as it is already. And then around those, that trio specifically of Victor, Tre, and Devin Vassell, the Spurs would just need 3-and-D players, guys who can shoot, guys who can defend, and then maybe you're hoping for a little bit more juice off of that. If you still have off the bench Tre Jones, the Spurs would be actually a really well fleshed out team to try and win. Darius Garland does a lot of what Tre Young does, but at a lesser level, and not quite the three-point volume and not quite the three-point shooter in my opinion, although he's been efficient in his career in those regards. I just think Tre Young is a way better player than Darius Garland. Anthony Simons might be the budget version of Tre Young in some ways, kind of putting up a lot of numbers this year in Portland, obviously not a big factor in winning for them. The Blazers were quite bad this year, but I don't think that really falls on Simons. I think he's a real plus player, and I think if he got into a system like San Antonio, again with his three-point pull-up volume, the more three-pointers around Wemby, the better, and Anthony Simons I think would make some sense. Another name I threw on here, Mikal Bridges. I don't see the Spurs really trading for him. I think it would be interesting if you're looking at building up a defense, something centered around Keldon Johnson and maybe a pick or two for Mikal Bridges. I know the Nets fans are going to say, we're not doing that. Probably not. The Nets don't seem to want to trade Mikal Bridges, regardless of what's offered to them. So Mikal Bridges will not be a San Antonio Spur more than likely, but he would be a really nice wing player to put around Wemby in my opinion, which is why I included him on here. I could see him possibly getting traded, although all signs point to Brooklyn likely not doing that. So when it comes to next season, what do I expect? For me, I don't think the Spurs are really going to step on the accelerator. Despite Wembanyama's greatness, the Spurs are not going to go all in this offseason, and the reason for that is they're trying to do the opposite of what Dallas did. You think about the Mavericks with Luka Doncic. They had to trade the 2019 first rounder to move up in the draft to get Luka Doncic. That turned into Tre Young, ironically. In the draft that they traded the 5th pick for the 3rd pick, that was Tre Young, and the next year was Cam Reddish. The Mavericks have yet to make 2 lottery picks with Luka Doncic on their roster. They've made a total of 1 lottery pick, and it was this past draft with Derek Lively. The Spurs are looking to add as much lottery talent around Wembanyama as possible so that they have less deficiencies on the roster compared to what Dallas has had to go through, where they've had to be aggressive in the trade market to buy upgrades. The Spurs are looking to manufacture those upgrades internally through drafting and developing, and I think that is why they will not step on the accelerator this offseason. That's why I think that if they can get 2 lottery picks in this year's draft, it'll be huge for them. They're going to look for small upgrades. That's where the Kyle Anderson, Kris Dunn things, kind of come in, and they're going to focus on the development and maybe earning 1 final lottery pick with Wembanyama next year, because I think the Spurs, within 2 years, they're going to be perennial playoff contenders. So this next season is really a prime opportunity to maybe get 1 more lottery pick. If they get 2 in this draft and 1 next draft in 2025, then you'll have 3 extra lottery picks around Wembanyama, which is probably the best way of building this team up. Next year, they'll probably win 30 to 40 games pretty comfortably. It felt like they had to try to not win this year for half the season at the beginning to prevent them from even, kind of ruining their draft pick in a way. Wembanyama is going to take another big step forward. He just seemed like every single game he got better and better and better. And by the start of next season, I think he's going to be a true All-NBA candidate and probably your Defensive Player of the Year in the 2024-2025 season. So because of that, I think San Antonio is going to take a big step forward. And then maybe they would push the chips in the following offseason. But San Antonio, for me, a team that with the right moves, and if they did step on the accelerator, that could all change. Because if they trade for Tre Young, they're a playoff team next year. I feel pretty confident saying that. I think Tre Young plus Victor Wembanyama offensively would be unfair. And then I think the Spurs with Wemby defensively would just still be really, really good. And I think as Wembanyama gets better and as the team actually turns their direction toward winning, I think this team is still going to be very, very dangerous and a fun one to watch over the next couple of years and beyond, because Wembanyama, like I said at the start of the video, might become one of the greatest to ever play the sport of basketball. Spurs fans, I really hope you did enjoy this video. It was a lot of fun to record. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more NBA content. And if you're a fan of one of the other 29 teams in the league, let me know who you want an offseason preview for next. I'm planning on recording a Toronto Raptors one here right around the corner, but let me know which team you would like after that, and we'll definitely make the steps to get that out on the channel as soon as possible for you guys. Thanks again so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.